AWS Serverless Application Model, SAM. The AWS Serverless Application Model, SAM, is an extension of AWS CloudFormation and is an open-source framework for building serverless applications. SAM is a template-driven model. The template provides a simplified way of defining resources, such as the Amazon API Gateway, AWS Lambda functions, Amazon DynamoDB tables, and event source mappings in your serverless applications by just using shorthand syntax. With just a few lines per AWS resource, you can define the application you want and model it using YAML or JSON. You can use SAM to run your serverless applications locally, package, and deploy your applications to the AWS cloud. During deployment, SAM transforms and expands the SAM syntax into AWS CloudFormation syntax, enabling you to build serverless applications faster. To get started with building SAM-based applications, use the AWS SAM CLI. SAM and SAM CLI are open-sourced under the Apache 2.0 license. Here is an example of a SAM template. The first two lines is the transform section. The second line indicates that it is a SAM template that needs to be transformed to the CloudFormation syntax. The next section defines the resources. The resource type, AWS Serverless Function, creates an AWS Lambda function. It also defines the code, handler, runtime, and execution policy for this Lambda function. The resource type API creates an Amazon API Gateway, defines the path and method, and its interface to connect to the Lambda function. The last line with resource type, simple table, creates an Amazon DynamoDB table. In addition, AWS SAM defines other resource types, such as layer version for Lambda layer version, and application for nested application. As you can see in this example, with just these simple lines of code, a Lambda function, an API gateway, and a DynamoDB table are created and defined to work together. Why SAM? Single deployment configuration. You can use SAM to organize related components, share configuration, such as memory and timeouts between resources, and deploy all related resources together as a single version entity. SAM also provides local testing and debugging capabilities for your serverless applications. You can use SAM CLI to step through and debug your code. SAM CLI provides a Lambda-like execution environment that lets you locally build, test, and debug applications defined by SAM templates. This helps to catch issues upfront before deploying in the cloud. Built-in best practices. You can deploy your infrastructure as config to leverage built-in best practices, such as code reviews. With just a few lines of SAM config, you can enable gradual deployments through AWS Code Deploy and tracing to diagnose issues using AWS X-Ray. Integration with development tools. SAM integrates with a suite of AWS serverless tools. You can find new applications in the AWS Serverless Application Repository, which is a managed repository for serverless applications. SAM also integrates with AWS Cloud9 IDE, where you can write, test, and debug SAM-based serverless applications. Using the AWS SAM template, you can build a deployment pipeline with AWS Code Build, AWS Code Deploy, and AWS Code Pipeline. AWS CodeStar also supports SAM. You can use CodeStar to start a project, configure a code repository, and a continuous integration, continuous delivery, CI/CD, pipeline for you. Built on AWS CloudFormation. Since AWS SAM is an extension of AWS CloudFormation, you can define resources using CloudFormation in your SAM template. You can use the full suite of resources, intrinsic functions, and other template features that are available in AWS CloudFormation. In addition, AWS SAM also gets the same reliable deployment capabilities of CloudFormation,